A company just paid $1.2 billion to own a brand it had already been operating for 36 years. Not to launch it, not to rescue it from a trademark squatter, not to settle a trademark dispute, to own it. On August 7, 2026, Yum China completed its acquisition of ownership of the Pizza Hut brand in mainland China from Yum Brands for $1.2 billion. And from a trademark perspective, this deal is much more interesting than the headline makes it sound. Because technically, Yum China was already operating Pizza Hut in China. It had the restaurants, it had the customers, it had the employees, it had the supply chain. It had spent decades building the business. But until this transaction closed, there was still one fundamental distinction. Yum China operated the brand. Yum Brands owned the brand. And those are not the same thing. But there is another number in this deal that may be even more surprising than $1.2 billion. It is $1.5 billion. Pizza Hut has more than 15,500 restaurants outside mainland China. That business is being sold for roughly $1.5 billion. Pizza Hut China has just over 4,000 restaurants, and the China brand deal is worth $1.2 billion. These are different transactions, so you cannot simply compare them store by store. But the contrast is still striking. More than 15,000 restaurants outside China, about $1.5 billion. Just over 4,000 in China, $1.2 billion. So why is the China piece worth anywhere near the rest of Pizza Hut? Because these are two very different stories. Outside China, much of the challenge is turnaround. In China, the story is still growth. Pizza Hut China is expanding, experimenting with new formats, and targeting more than 6,000 restaurants by 2028. And that makes one detail especially important. Before this acquisition, Yum China paid a license fee of about 3% to operate Pizza Hut in mainland China. As the China business grew, that fee grew with it. More stores, more sales, more license payments. So Yum China is not only paying for control of what Pizza Hut China already is, it is changing the economics of what Pizza Hut China could become next. That is why I would look at the $1.2 billion price differently. Most people will look backward and ask, how much value did Pizza Hut build in China over the last 36 years? But the more interesting question may be, how much value does Yum China expect to build from here? The next store, the next city, the next customer, the next stage of growth. In other words, Yum China is not simply buying the Chinese piece of a global restaurant brand. It is buying greater control over the part of Pizza Hut that is still expanding. And that leads to a much bigger point for foreign companies. China may begin as just another market on an expansion plan, but if the business succeeds, it can develop its own customers, local recognition, distribution network, digital presence, and revenue. At that point, China is no longer simply another place where the global brand sells products. China can become a standalone brand asset. Pizza Hut gives us a billion-dollar example of that. Customers still see the same Pizza Hut name, but underneath that name, ownership can now follow a territorial line. Mainland China on one side, the rest of the world on the other. That is what makes this transaction so interesting from a trademark perspective. Trademark rights are territorial, and the commercial value created in China can eventually become large enough that control of the China brand matters on its own. For a foreign company entering China, that creates a timing problem. At the beginning, China may represent almost no revenue. The trademark can feel like a small administrative expense, something that can wait. But if the business succeeds, the situation changes. The name starts appearing on packaging. Distributors build around it. Customers search for it. Reviews accumulate. A local brand identity develops. Revenue begins depending on it. The business is creating China-specific value. But that commercial success does not automatically create China trademark ownership. The market creates the value. The trademark helps determine who controls the name that value is built around. That is why I think companies often ask the wrong cost question. They ask, how much does it cost to register a trademark in China? But if China is a serious market, the more important question is, what could it cost if the China business succeeds and you do not control the brand? Pizza Hut is obviously an extreme example. There was no filing mistake here, no trademark squatter, no ownership dispute. The licensing structure was legitimate and worked for decades. But that is exactly why the deal is so useful. It shows how economically important a China-specific brand position can become when the market succeeds. And the same principle works at a much smaller scale. A foreign company may enter China through one distributor, and have almost no sales in Y. 5 years later, that same brand may have local customers, retail relationships, marketplace reviews, inventory, marketing, and meaningful revenue. The trademark law did not suddenly become more important, the business did. And as the business becomes more valuable, control of the brand becomes more valuable with it. That is the signal I think foreign companies should take from this deal. Everyone sees the $1.2 billion price tag. But the more important message is what sits behind it. China can create enough independent brand value to become an asset of its own. So if China is a serious possibility for your business, do not wait for the market to prove that the brand is valuable. Secure the China trademark before the China brand becomes valuable. Because by the time everyone can see the value, the cheap part of the decision may already be over.